There's a strange pattern among some of the most capable people you'll ever meet. The better they get at something, the worse they think they are at it. Not because they're actually falling behind. By almost any outside measure, they're improving. But because of something happening quietly inside the brain that almost nobody explains correctly. Something that turns growth itself into the very thing that makes you feel like you're failing. If you've ever felt like everyone around you has it figured out except you, even in an area where you've clearly gotten better, this video is going to change how you read that feeling completely. Picture someone a few months into learning a new skill, a job, a language, an instrument, doesn't matter which. At first, they feel great, almost unreasonably confident. Progress feels fast, visible, obvious. Every small win feels like proof they've basically got this. Then, without much warning, that confidence collapses. They start noticing mistakes they never noticed before. They compare themselves to people further ahead and feel like they're falling behind, even though, by any reasonable measure, they've actually improved since they started. The easy explanation is that they're just being hard on themselves, maybe a little insecure, maybe a perfectionist. But that explanation doesn't hold up. This isn't random self-doubt. It's a specific, predictable, well-documented pattern, and it shows up almost every single time someone moves from beginner to actually getting good. So here's the real question worth sitting with. Why does learning more sometimes make you feel like you know less? The answer lives in something researchers sometimes call the competence curve. And once you see the shape of it, you'll recognize it instantly from your own life. When someone first starts learning a skill, they don't yet know enough to see their own mistakes. They haven't been exposed to how complicated the subject actually is. So confidence shoots up fast, almost immediately. Some people nickname this stage the peak of confidence. You don't know what you don't know, so nothing feels like it's in your way. Everything feels achievable because you can't yet see the size of what you're attempting. But the moment real understanding starts to form, something shifts hard. You begin to see the actual size of the subject for the first time. You start noticing the skill level of people who are genuinely advanced, people you couldn't even properly evaluate before because you didn't know enough to judge them. You start catching your own errors in real time, sometimes errors you'd been making for weeks without realizing it. Confidence doesn't just plateau at this point, it drops, often below where it even started. This dip has an actual name in some of the research and popular psychology writing built around it, the Valley of Despair. It's the point where competence is genuinely rising, climbing steadily in the background, while self-perception is falling just as fast, sometimes even faster. This is the part that trips people up, because it feels backwards. It feels like something has gone wrong. In reality, it's often the clearest sign that something has gone exactly right. You've simply gained enough skill to finally see how much skill actually exists. Let's make this concrete with an example. Imagine two people learning to cook. One has followed a handful of recipes exactly, step by step, and everything's turned out fine. They feel confident, maybe even a little impressed with themselves. The other person has spent 6 months actually learning technique, knife skills, seasoning by taste, understanding why a sauce breaks or why a steak needs to rest. That second person, despite being objectively far more skilled, often feels less confident walking into a kitchen than the first person did after 3 recipes. Why? Because the first person doesn't yet know enough to see how much there is to master. The second person does. Their confidence collapsed not because they got worse. It collapsed because their vision improved. The same pattern shows up almost everywhere you look once you know to look for it. New managers often feel most confident in their first few weeks, before they've seen how many things can go wrong in a team they're responsible for. Musicians often feel most discouraged right after they start training with a serious teacher, not because they're playing worse, but because they can suddenly hear every flaw a beginner's ear would have missed completely. Writers frequently say their most painful phase came after their first real improvement, not before it. The moment they could finally recognize good writing well enough to see how far their own work still had to go. In every one of these cases, the discomfort arrives at almost the exact same point, right after a real jump in ability, not before it. Now, here's where this stops being just an interesting metaphor and becomes something backed by real research. The original studies behind this idea came from psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger in 1999. Their research found that people early in a skill or subject tend to overestimate their own ability, not out of arrogance, but simply because they lack the awareness needed to judge their own performance accurately. As real skill develops, that self-awareness tends to catch up, and in a lot of cases, it overshoots. People become harsher judges of themselves than the evidence actually supports, before eventually settling into something closer to an accurate self-assessment. It's worth being precise here because this specific finding has been debated and refined a lot since 1999. Some researchers argue parts of the original effect can be explained by statistical patterns in how the data was measured, not purely psychology. This is an active area of academic disagreement, not a settled fact. So the core idea here, early confidence outpacing early skill, followed by a painful correction, is well supported by decades of follow-up research, even if the exact size and shape of the curve is still debated among researchers. There's a closely related and in some ways even more specific pattern called the impostor phenomenon. It was first described by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes in 1978, and it shows up disproportionately in high achievers. People who are demonstrably skilled, sometimes by any external measure genuinely excellent at what they do, but who privately feel like frauds, convinced they'll eventually be exposed. Here's what connects both ideas. Expertise doesn't just add knowledge. It adds the ability to see how much more there is to know. That visibility feels exactly like falling behind, even while, underneath it, you're actually moving forward faster than you were before. Think about how strange that is for a second. The feeling of falling behind and the feeling of moving forward can, at certain moments, be caused by the exact same underlying process. Your brain doesn't clearly distinguish between, I am bad at this, and I can finally see how much this subject contains. Both register as the same uncomfortable, deflating sensation, even though only one of them is actually true. This also explains something that confuses a lot of people about experts. Why the most knowledgeable person in a room is sometimes the most hesitant to call themselves an expert at all. It's not false modesty. It's that true expertise comes with a permanently upgraded view of the subject's full size. A view beginners simply don't have access to yet, and can't have access to, because seeing it requires already knowing enough to look. So, what does this mean in practice, for you specifically? If you've ever felt most uncertain right after a real stretch of growth, not before it, but right after, that timing isn't a coincidence. And it isn't a personal failure either. Beginners rarely feel like imposters. They don't know enough yet to notice the gaps in their own understanding. It's almost always the people getting genuinely competent who feel the most doubt, because they're the first ones with a clear enough view to actually see how much is still out there left to learn. Self-doubt, in this very specific form, the kind that shows up after progress, not before it, isn't reliable evidence of a problem. In a lot of cases, it's evidence that your understanding just leveled up faster than your self-image could keep pace with. This matters more today than it probably did a generation ago because of how much of everyone else's process is now invisible to you. Social feeds are full of other people's finished projects, their confident posts, their polished, after-the-fact highlight reels. What you almost never see is their version of this same dip. Nobody posts the 6 weeks where they felt completely lost right after they started actually improving. So it becomes incredibly easy to assume everyone else somehow skipped the valley entirely, that they went straight from beginner to expert without ever passing through that uncomfortable middle stretch, and that you're the only one still stuck in it. There's a practical piece worth taking from this too. If you're currently in the middle of feeling behind at something you've genuinely put real time into, that feeling is not a reliable signal to quit. It's frequently the opposite. A signal that you've built enough understanding to finally see the terrain clearly, which is exactly the point most people give up, right before things would have started getting easier again. You're not behind. Almost everyone who's ever gotten genuinely good at anything difficult passed through this exact same stretch. It's just that most of them never told anyone about it, so it looks, from the outside, like it never happened. Go back to where this started. That strange pattern of people getting better at something and somehow feeling worse about it at the exact same time. Now you know what that pattern actually is. It isn't proof you're failing. It's what it looks like from the inside when your standards finally catch up to your skill. The discomfort of feeling behind is often just the sound of your own vision improving. The moment you finally have enough skill to see how much more there is. Keep going. That feeling isn't a stop sign. It's usually the clearest sign you're supposed to.